Oh, hi! I found myself in a TARDIS this morning, so I guess while we are here we should do something a little on topic, so why not go serial by serial through Doctor Who's classic run, specifically the first Doctor. For context, Doctor Who has pretty much been on repeat in my house. For the past few years, it's been a part of my nightly routine to put on 2 episodes of classic Doctor Who before bed. Right now that is especially easy for me since all of the classic series is currently available for streaming free on Tubi, but I also have access to the entire series on physical media in some way, shape, or form, whether that's in novel format or the animated or telesnap reconstructions. Again, if you are in the US, though, like me, and you want to do something similar, I would absolutely check out Tubi. Keep a list of the episodes that are lost and missing, and when you get to one of those, it is pretty easy to find a reconstruction by doing a pretty quick search on your favorite search engine. Just search the episode title, something like Doctor Who, The Mythmakers, Episode 1, and with minimal effort, your search will be satisfied. If you are more interested in an abstract conversation on the first Doctor as a whole, we did that in our last video. This is meant to be a little bit of a companion to that, where I documented my thoughts on each story immediately after finishing it. So let's get to it, beginning with the serial that started it all. "1963's An Unearthly Child." The Doctor's first outing is such an odd time capsule for what could have been. The Doctor is minding his own business when his granddaughter Susan unknowingly brings her 2 teachers home. Because the Doctor is a bit of a dick, everyone travels through time and space to a prehistoric place. Not really explicit where that is. The rest of the story, our heroes are in and out of the clutches of the cavemen, our first Doctor Who antagonist. So dangerous and witty, the Doctor might actually kill them. For realsies, though, the cavemen might be the dumbest Doctor Who antagonists in the series. And I know they are cavemen, but come on. These are the first villains the audience would see getting one over on the Doctor. Speaking of, it is so clear that the titular Doctor is not meant to be a hero, as Ian, one of Susan's teachers, along with Barbara, not only stops the Doctor from doing a murder, but saves the day multiple times along with Susan. Both Susan and Ian feel like pretty radical characters for when the series was released, and it would fit in quite well in modern iterations of the series, whereas the first Doctor has since become the butt of jokes in many aspects. 1964's The Daleks. And their escape from cavemen so dense that they cannot light a fire, the Doctor and co. overshoot their shot and end up on an alien planet trapped in a war between pretty good people and very ugly super space Nazis. The ever-present in the franchise, Daleks. The Doctor, Susan, Ian, and Barbara are still on board from the previous story. Unfortunately, Barbara isn't given a whole lot to do over, multiple episodes here, and the Doctor continues to be as abrasive as ever while Susan and Ian really continue to shine here. Susan is constantly stepping up despite being depicted as a child, while Ian keeps the Doctor in check and Barbara calm. The Daleks are a little different than one might expect, but have changed far less over the literal decades than virtually anything else in this franchise. I would be upset about the pacing being stretched out over so many episodes, but I am fully aware that this is all I have upcoming until at least the end of the second Doctor's run. The trademark flubs of early Doctor Who are also here, and it's actually really refreshing, adding much of the needed charm to the character that is kind of largely grating, especially when he is putting everyone in very, very uncomfortable amounts of danger. Oh, and the Daleks are definitely smarter than the cavemen in the first story. I know, it's a very high bar. 1964's The Edge of Destruction. A brief story for the first Doctor where he, his granddaughter, and her 2 school teachers whom he kidnapped and has threatened multiple times in as many days are knocked unconscious by some shenanigans resulting in some classic television amnesia. We watch characters we don't know nearly well enough, debate who they are, and unravel what's going on. For the first time, Barbara has substantial contributions to the solving of the problem as she leads the charge to uncover the overall mystery inside the TARDIS. I think this story would have had more of an effect if it came a little later in the series, maybe right before Susan leaves, although I know they could not have had that preemptive hindsight. These couple of episodes are an excellent display of what each actor can do with their characters, each showing a very wide range, although Susan is a little weak in this story, I think. Oh, and spoilers, I guess, but no real villains this episode, so sweet. 1964's Marco Polo. Isn't it great that Marco Polo is so kind and understanding as the Doctor and co. stumble land in the middle of his caravan? You know, treating our protagonists practically as if they were royalty, genuinely caring for them while some random-ass warlord schemes in the background as our villain, while Marco deflects the Doctor's negotiations and flat-out rejects his schemes to get back to our favorite blue police box. The heart of this story, again, is with Susan and her new bestie, one of the girls traveling with Marco, betrothed to someone not important. While the Doctor is doing his scheming in the background, everyone is focused on this character and the fact that she doesn't want to be part of this arranged marriage. It is the empathizing with her that gets us in the good graces of Polo in the long run and ultimately leads our time-traveling crew to be in position to get back to the TARDIS. Even in the novella, though, which is what we read for this experience of the story. Sure, she is the one that puts the first bit of suspicion on the villain's dastardly plans, but even in her moment of triumph, she needs to be saved by everyone. While Ian literally rides off alone into 1200s Asia to help a girl he has never met before, Susan makes the best friend possible, and the Doctor loses the TARDIS in a bet. Wait, what? Outside of knowing what I know now about Marco Polo, this was an entertaining story to read through. It is mostly just the Doctor trying and failing to get back into and fix the TARDIS while everyone around him deals with the threat of the month. My two favorite characters in this TARDIS crew, Ian and Susan, continue to shine while the Doctor gets a little stuck in the mud, due to behind-the-scenes issues with William Hartnell's health, unfortunately. 1964's The Keys of Marinus. After an entirely deleted adventure with Marco Polo, our faithful adventurers find themselves, not for the first nor last time, find themselves where they don't want to be, and are tasked with getting the titular MacGuffins of Marinus, which largely end up being more of an excuse to put Ian on a sham trial for a classic lesson in ethics. And with Ian on trial, Barbara again gets a chance to shine while she and Susan largely do the detective work, while the Doctor reveals why he didn't choose the lawyer as his day. I wish this story had a little more cohesion. There doesn't seem to be like a good reason for the keys and the trial to be paired. We can find a better reason to put Ian on trial that more thematically matches what else is happening. Two solid, if not tropey plots that don't mesh for me, but this is finally Barbara's chance to shine. 1964's The Aztecs. Still missing the mark of contemporary England, this time we land in the center of an Aztec temple. Barbara takes the episode's spotlight when she claims to be a goddess, which, slay queen. Walking the line between her desires, who doesn't want to be worshipped as a goddess, and her good nature of not wanting to watch everyone else be sacrificed. Solid goals, I'd think. Ian pretty much tries and fails to avoid a dick measuring contest throughout the story, and the Doctor putzes around trying to get back to the TARDIS while doing old people flirting and accidentally sabotaging Ian's efforts. Susan is kind of there throughout, but feels like with everything else going on, she got the short end of the stick this story, which nothing bad happens. She doesn't do anything bad. I do understand why this story sometimes gets promoted as a good introduction to the first Doctor. Between his concern for the timeline, ethics discussions, and tinkering, this definitely feels the most like the Doctor has been thus far. I think it is great that Barbara's a little flawed in her humanity. It adds so much depth to her character without taking away her kindness. The episode's villains, the most British Aztecs you've ever done seen, are pretty active in both being shits and getting one over on our protags from time to time. I remember not loving this one on my first viewing, but it's really grown on me by this time. 1964's The Sensorites. We have more or less given up on caring whether the crew gets back to England as the Doctor begins to see Barbara and Ian as people and friends instead of those two annoying teachers that followed my granddaughter home. The amount of character work that went from what we saw in An Unearthly Child, how the characters interact at that start of this story, is so much better than one might expect. Landing on a nondescript spaceship and isolated from the TARDIS, the focus of this story ends up being on the political intrigue of the titular Sensorites as they hold the solution to getting into our favorite big blue box, and are pretty set on keeping non-Sensorites from leaving their sphere of influence. While the Sensorites are not particularly special as far as aliens go, they can't see in the dark and loud noise hurts them. Same here, friends. Although, that being said, they do make for a pretty great allegory for xenophobia. Barbara again gets the short end of the stick, spending most of this story entirely off-screen. More than anyone, perhaps the Doctor gets to be the hero of his own series here, as he is constantly negotiating and sciencing throughout. Outside of not really having a good balance for its characters, this continues to be a great evolution of the series we have been getting thus far, letting the characters grow and putting them in fun and interesting dilemmas. 1964's The Reign of Terror. A very confident Doctor shoves his companions of several adventures out of the TARDIS doors ready to leave. Luckily, though, Barbara convinces him otherwise because we missed the mark both spatially and temporally again, landing smack dab in the middle of the French Revolution. Our protagonists bounce in and out of capture from both revolutionaries and the standing government, while bumping into Robespierre and Napoleon. Whereas in other historical pieces, here it feels like our crew is just here to watch history unfold versus exploring the moral dilemmas of how culture has changed over time, like in both the Aztecs and in Marco Polo, although there are plenty of conversations regarding the weight of how history is unfolding before everyone's eyes and the weight of that burden. Barbara gets a lot more to do here than in previous stories, being one of our prime negotiators while Susan and Ian are incapacitated and the Doctor is running his own tangent schemes to his own personal delight in a fun costume. If you're watching the 2013 animated reconstructions from Planet 55 in order to supplement the missing episodes like I had access to, for this watching, the editing is kind of all over the place. I don't understand the edits when nearly every set and scene is blocked similarly and in previous or future episodes in this story with existing footage. While on the animation, it in of itself is incredibly low budget, but it does get a large range of emotion across, leaving me far more impressed with what we have than upset with its shortcomings. While the story throughout might be a little disappointing to some as our protagonists are more or less moved around without a ton of their own agency while the revolution is going on around them, but Barbara finally is getting more to do, and the Doctor's pure joy in his own schemes balances a lot of that slow pace. The Planet of the Giants from 1964. We finally landed back in 1960s England. Woo! Time for a celebration, except we shrunk the kids before Honey ever in fact shrunk the kids. Or themselves, or blew up the baby. But a few years after the Incredible Man shrunk. Oh, and we have to solve a Moira in the background. For being on an early BBC budget, Planet of the Giants does an excellent job putting its lead cast into a believably giant-sized set. Continually isolating the characters in cramped spaces is a smart way to work within the budget, since the inside of a small box looks dark and cramped no matter the size. This slightly shorter than average serial also has ample opportunity to use all of the characters, but Barbara again is written to do nothing but be anxious and let Ian save her while Susan is at least on the same footing as the Doctor throughout, if being frustrated with her lack of being taken seriously. I'm personally a big fan of the setting of teeny tiny sized people in a normal sized world, so it is a treat to see that executed in one of my favorite franchises so well. The Moira plot just kind of happens without much agency from our heroes in the matter, but we need to fill the screen time and set the scene somehow for our protagonists. Everything comes together for a very fun and very unique adventure for Doctor Who. Definitely one of my favorites thus far. The Dalek Invasion of Earth from 1964. Not to be confused with the Dalek Invasion of Earth 2150 AD. That is a movie.
In the not too distant future.
Our first iteration of the TARDIS crew lands in England, not for the first time, but this time around someone has invaded the Earth, and you'll never guess who. It's the Daleks. After the Doctor, his granddaughter, and his companions are separated from their big blue box of a time ship, they team up with a handful of resistant fighters to have another go at the Dalek menace. We are finally here, the first big shakeup of the series, as this story also ends with the exiting of Susan's actress Carol Ann Ford and character from the series as a regular. Knowing that this series would continue for as long as it does, I am really excited to see where this current crew of 3 goes forward with Susan no longer present, but I do definitely feel ways about this being Susan's last major story. From the beginning of the series, she has been my personal favorite TARDIS crew member, pushing herself and challenging her grandfather at every turn. So for her last story to start with her being the reason we are separated from the TARDIS and end with her not really being given a decision in staying or leaving, as the Doctor just locks his granddaughter out of the TARDIS, gives a speech, and fucks off. It almost kind of feels like Susan is being punished by being evicted from the TARDIS, despite William Hartnell's iconic and really moving closing speech. It is a great story, one of my favorites thus far, especially for the Daleks. This is one of my favorite outings they have with the First Doctor. Everyone but Susan gets a lot to do, Barbara especially. It's just that kicking out Susan after the Doctor gives her a verbal lashing for 6 episodes straight is less triumphant and ceremonious to me than I think it's supposed to come across, but Susan is out. And we aren't even halfway through season 2 yet, so let us move on to 1965's The Rescue. This time, the Doctor just slept through the TARDIS landing on the planet Ditto. When Barbara wakes up to find him, they all step outside separately until everyone is naturally separated from the TARDIS, thanks to our antagonists of the serial. This leads to Barbara immediately finding our replacement companion in Vicky, who is marooned with the last living crewmate of her crashed vessel. The Doctor and Ian soon follow after jumping through some booby-trapped caves. The real plot comes in the second episode, where we delve into what happened to the people who used to live on the planet and the mystery of Vicky's crewmate. As well as that big antagonist from earlier, Vicky has all of the pluck and energy of her forebearer Susan, but none of the mystery and the knowledge that made Susan so commanding and deep a character in her own right. I imagine the Doctor will love using her as an emotional punching bag when she comes across something she doesn't understand. Barbara, meanwhile, really steps up in carrying a lot of the character work in that first half of the serial, and taking real action in the second half throughout. Really, the Doctor, Ian, and Barbara is an excellent crew in its own right, and I wish we got more of just them, as the Doctor and Ian have a really strong adventure on their own, and the Doctor gets his time to shine, even if he is saved by a little deus ex machina at the end. I'm really excited to see where the series takes us next, and I hope that Vicky does more than I expect she will. In 1965's The Romans, after a pretty tense literal cliffhanger that ended the last serial, we kind of just start the story in the ancient Roman Empire without any real explanation. Off-camera, our crew casually left the TARDIS at the bottom of a canyon and have been squatting in some rando's house who is out of town. After just a month of leisure, the Doctor decides to travel to Rome with Vicky while Ian and Barbara are kidnapped and sold into slavery for Omega's sake. The story's A and B plots happen entirely separate from one another. Even though everyone ends up in Rome in the end of the story, Doctor and Vicky never learn their friends were sold into slavery. They just steal someone's identity and pretend to play the lute for Emperor Nero. While Ian ends his own little Ben-Hurian odyssey and Barbara schemes to avoid her new owner, Emperor Nero. The Romans juggles a lot of plot beats that make the story move quicker than perhaps any Doctor Who story we've seen thus far. While I don't love the story of writer Dennis Spooner's last serial, his dialogue was definitely a highlight and especially steals the show here. Barbara's plot works well with the Doctor's and Vicky's, even if they never intersect, and while Ian's is more of a standalone plot, he is really put through the ringer. Easily my favorite historical-based episode thus far. 1965's The Web Planet. This time around, the TARDIS crew is kind of minding their own business when the police box is pulled down to Vortis, a planet in the midst of a war between a bunch of Mothmen and whining giant ants. As you might expect, the crew ends up separated from each other, some captured by ants, hereafter referred to as the Zarbi, and others the Mothmen. Likewise, they are named the Menonoptera. While the crew does have their many escape attempts, we learn that a great intelligence, not that great intelligence, has been controlling one of the factions and forced the other off the planet years ago. So now we have to also help one side win a war, I guess. When the original producers demanded there be no bug-eyed monsters in Doctor Who, I am confident this is exactly what they were worried about. While everyone in the TARDIS crew is on point throughout and given something to do, they are stuck in an otherwise generic and low-budget sci-fi war story playing pranks on people in bug costumes. Since Susan's leaving, though, Barbara has continued to be a real boss, which is what I was hoping for. The Doctor and Vicky, meanwhile, spend most of the episode talking to the ether and waving tuning forks at ant costumes. Maybe I missed something deeper in the Web Planet, but this has definitely not been my favorite of the first Doctor stories thus far. That being said, though, The Crusade from 1965. For this watch, I accessed the telesnaps and the written reconstructions opposed to having the novel or there being any animated reconstruction, unfortunately. This time around, though, the TARDIS landed pretty safely, it would appear, without incident, but nobody having learned their lesson. The moment we step outside the TARDIS, someone gets kidnapped. Barbara. And thus we have an adventure. This one themed to the Third Crusade, the Doctor and Vicky hanging around with King Richard the Lionheart while Ian gets knighted and rides off to save Barbara, who is avoiding the machinations of the Molten Saltine Saladin's less than honorable underlings. Very much mirroring the Doctor and Vicky's adventure here. Ultimately, this is a story where the protagonists we have been following don't have a whole lot of real agency again, as the Doctor's plot is just asking Richard the Lionheart for help, Barbara is trying to escape a few times, and Ian once again just kind of gets to survive, although he does save the day at the end with some last-minute outwitting. As with many classic Doctor Who historicals, this is a story rife with brownface, unfortunately, as was common practice at the BBC at the time. It is pretty refreshing, though, that great care was taken to show that the Muslim characters portrayed are generally treated with respect, and show just as much compassion and wisdom as King Richard is portrayed with at the very least. If there are characters that are a little more backhanded, it is clear that there is a counterpart on the other side as well. The Crusade continues the trend of improved writing in the series, famously recreating the cadence of Shakespeare's prose for much of the story's dialogue to great effect. Across the board, this serial specifically has great production value. The sets and the action sequences are on par with the improved writing. It is really sad that half of this story is entirely lost to time. The Space Museum from 1965. What happened after the Crusade? Who cares? Half of those episodes were scrubbed and we just woke up in a friggin' space museum without explanation. The Doctor and his friends are kind of stuck out of phase for an episode, seeing the future where they are all captured but unable to interact with anything for time travel reasons I really could not explain. Then things turn into a more traditional, if smartly written, cat and mouse story for 3 episodes, between the museum guards and our crew, plus a few rebels, because what is Doctor Who without rebels? Here's a story where the Doctor does get sidelined, captured pretty early on and strapped to a chair while everyone else runs around. I've noticed a slight trend in the last few serials where it feels like Ian is kind of being dumbed down, while at the same time being given more action to partake in. Barbara gets a bit more to do than normal, while Vicky primarily works as the go-between between everyone else and the rebels while they became relevant. It is exciting we get some sort of playing around with the time travel concept in that first episode, even if it makes zero sense whatsoever. It also feels like there has been much more attention to the writing throughout Season 2. But the Space Museum does have some particularly fun moments. You can really see the series evolving into what it's going to become gradually with the Doctor himself. 1965's The Chase. We practically get a whole episode of our protagonists relaxing before shit goes sour. It's kind of refreshing, leading to 5 straight episodes of running away from the Daleks through time and space. It is a really quick synopsis for a really simple plot that the story takes full advantage of by giving us constantly changing sets and situations to get out of in a way that feels less like the padding that we had in previous stories. Unlike Susan's final adventure, both Ian and Barbara get a lot to do throughout, highlighting both of their purposes in the series' original conceptualization. The Doctor's tantrum at their departure does equally feel like a regression for his character a little bit. It makes the first Doctor feel less like the authority he wants to be and more like a petulant child who has to be convinced to help keep his promises. I feel like the original TARDIS crew of 4 never found the right balance, but I am really excited to see what happens with the new member we get in the final episode. And thanks to legal issues with the Beatles, you might be missing a scene in this serial depending on where you live. And that has to be the most disappointing reason to be missing anything Doctor Who, because this is otherwise an exciting adventure that continues the trend of improved writing and stories. The Time Meddler from 1965. Most of our first episode with the new TARDIS crew here is spent introducing our new companion, Stephen, to the TARDIS, so much so that it feels like a soft relaunch to reacquaint the new audiences with the series' general format, if this wasn't the finale of the series' 2nd season, though. But as soon as the Doctor gets Time Lord napped by the first appearance of another Time Lord in The Monk, we get a genuine plot and maybe the first instance of the pseudo-historical stories that the series would become known for in the future, as the new TARDIS crew works to stop this monk from meddling in time. This does make for a pretty great introduction to the rival Time Lords as a whole, in a way that I wish the monk or the War Master or another rogue Time Lord that isn't the Master would appear in the series as a regular or a semi-regular antagonist in New Who, honestly. The Doctor bounces really well off of a character on the same intellectual footing here, while Vicky gets a lot to do while leading Stephen through his first adventure in time and space. There is also a lot to just appreciate about the Time Meddler. But for everything it does right, it does lack a little bit of energy. With the exception of the monk and his titular time meddling, this was a story that felt a little harder to pay attention to than other stories in Doctor Who's second season, and as much as there is to love about this first Doctor story, there is a feeling of lacking, even divorcing this from normal series finale expectations. Galaxy 4. Let me know if you've heard this one before. After the TARDIS crew lands and walks out of their ship, they are caught between two alien races locked in conflict, only to find the moralities of each side not to be exactly what they seemed. This edition, it's Femlians, the Dravens, versus domed robots that are definitely not the Daleks. And the domed robots are drones for the prettiest aliens you can imagine. They were called the Rails, actually. It's an old story to see how our new companions will fare in a similar situation to our previous crew. Steven especially gets to put his foot down and put the Dravens in their place, which is a little weird. I have a copy of the 2021 animated release of this serial in black and white, but I also know the animation is on Tubi to be enjoyed in color. Either way, it is not the most engaging animated serial, I think in large part due to the hugely unexciting backdrops mixed with the less than dynamic character animation. I think I slightly prefer the animation we got in Reign of Terror, honestly. Either way, though, I am far more happier to have an animated version of the story than to not have any at all. Mission to the Unknown. Oh, okay. We get a story completely devoid of the TARDIS and the Doctor meant to set up the next 16-episode multi-story arc the Doctor goes on. That's actually really, really cool. Our protagonists this episode are a couple of randos on a mission to sabotage the Daleks', master plan, which is upcoming. Too bad they keep getting pricked by thorns that straight up make you want to kill your buddies. Oh, and the Daleks are rolling around in the background for good measure, mastering said plan. Good news is, unlike other Lost episodes though, because of the cast lacking recognizable characters, there is a well-done, officially recognized shot-for-shot remake available on the official Doctor Who YouTube channel. Bad news though is this is an episode that is largely just set up with a largely inconsequential, if well-done sci-fi tragedy main plot. 1965's The Mythmakers. One day we will step away from the TARDIS and not immediately get taken into custody, but not on the day of the Mythmakers, though. This time around, the crew gets split between the Greeks and the Trojan during the final days of the Trojan War. The Doctor and Steven with the Greeks, while Vicky and the TARDIS in its entirety are taken to Troy. Like the Reign of Terror and the Crusades before, our plot is again all about trying to get back together while meeting as many name-droppable figures as possible. Mythmakers is a story that really plays with the fact that the quote-unquote history we are exploring is largely unsubstantiated, as all of the records of the Trojan War, which did actually happen, were written long after the conflict actually occurred. In this case, we are very much de-romanticizing every character in a very modern-feeling way. Achilles doesn't win his fight because he is part deity. Hector is surprised by the TARDIS landing, and Achilles just takes advantage. Even if there is a little bit of padding, this makes for an exceptionally fun story for the Doctor from the perspective of how they just play around with the story. Unlike other historical stories, the Doctor gets a lot more agency in helping Odysseus scheme, and again, what they do with every name you would recognize keeps the story very, very engaging. Even in the very rushed and mashed together reconstruction we have, since again, just about all the footage of this story is lost. 1966's The Daleks' Master Plan. Time to pay off all of that setup we got in Mission to the Unknown, where the Doctor, Steven, and his brand new companion Katarina, whom didn't get much to do last serial, besides just working in the background in Troy, and their epic journey to keep the core of the Time Destructor away from the Daleks and their allies who want to nondescriptly conquer the world. The idea of Katarina as a companion has always really fascinated me. A companion who is so out of time that they have no concept of science outside of magic. Color me. Because, the series is in black and white. Surprised that we get virtually nothing out of this idea outside of a great speech from the first Doctor about the arc we could have gotten. We then get to speedrun through two additional companions, both really interesting military types who have their worldviews changed throughout the story, but both are surprisingly lost as well throughout the story's runtime, setting up the next story for just the Doctor and Steven to go on an adventure. That's really cool. The danger the TARDIS crew is in because of the Daleks and their master plan does feel real and palpable. That's what happens when 3 named characters are killed throughout the serial. It makes for a cat-and-mouse story about keeping the MacGuffin out of the hands of the bad guys, headed across 12 episodes of time and space hopping as engaging as it possibly can be, honestly. That being said, this is probably one of the worst serials that could be missing. The 2003 loose cannon reconstructions do their best, and they are really, really well done if you can get your hands on them, but you can feel the loss of dynamic movement in the 10 episodes that are still missing. This is the first time in this entire journey that it felt like real homework to get through a whole story as it currently exists. I needed to reference plot summaries and JoshSnares' excellent documentary on the story to fully understand and appreciate the whole thing. Oh, and episode 7 is randomly a Christmas episode that doesn't really tie into everything else that I found really fun and charming, though. 1966 is the Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve. We go from a metaphorical massacre of companions to a more literal massacre in this very historical serial where the Doctor and Stephen decide to hang around France in the 16th century, unknowingly a few days before the Massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve, a real-life event where French Catholic leaders put together an assassination of the Huguenot leaders, and the Huguenots were a very specific group of French Protestants, if you did not know, like I was unaware of, that snowballed into the murders of as many as 30,000 Huguenot men, women, and children. Oh my God. This is absolutely Stephen's story as the Doctor immediately buggers off to hang out off camera while Stephen makes friend with a whole bunch of doomed Protestants. Stephen's tragedy is only doubled when a Catholic abbot shows up looking identical to the Doctor, and Stephen accidentally fucks a servant girl over in the confusion, making it all the more hurtful when the Doctor just ignores Stephen's pleas to save this girl's life for no real reason. In concept, this is one of the most dour and tragic episodes in the series' history. In practice, it is kind of very much all over the place. While Stephen being confused and lost, making friends with people doomed for their beliefs is really exceptional stuff. Easily my favorite story writing in the first Doctor Who's run so far. The Doctor's hypocrisy and absence throughout the story is really palpable, and the emotional weight we would get in Stephen's leaving the TARDIS is immediately lost because, psych, new companion Dodo literally runs into the series and Stephen just changes his mind. Again, we are looking at the loose cannon reconstructions that are exceptionally well done for what they had to work with. This is a story that works better in this format because of its length and subject matter, I think. As it stands for me, this is an amazing showcase for a companion, something akin to the more recent 73 Yards mixed with the ending Donna didn't want at the end of Fires of Pompeii. The Ark from 1966. We are introduced to a new companion by her running into the TARDIS and becoming the Typhoid Mary of the common cold. Would that make her Cold Carol? For one of the last human-bearing spaceships in existence, oh my god. Meaning the Doctor has to science the shit out of the day to avoid execution and stop a plague from wiping out the human race and the alien slaves that they have hanging around, who get a little bit of justice during the second half of the serial. Stephen gets his own little B-plot halfway through as well, so we can see how Dodo and the Doctor interact and how they bounce off of each other, which really feels no better or worse than everything that came with Vicky before, just a little more rushed in the bonding of the characters, I felt. It does feel weird how okay everyone seems to be with the Guardians of the Human Race just casually having slaves here. That fact being the entire point of the second half of the story does little to address the Doctor's real cavalier attitude about it. The story being essentially broken into 2 halves, 2 episodes each, does make the pacing excellent though. The Celestial Toymaker from 1966. For the first time, Doctor Who ignores both science and historical fiction to give us an entirely fantastical adventure with a benevolent and bored god in the Toymaker, who separates our TARDIS crew as well as turn the Doctor invisible, so William Hartnell could have a very well-deserved vacation, forcing everyone to compete in a series of very nonsensical games to get back to our favorite big blue box. With the Doctor being both invisible and literally mute for half of the serial, his loss is especially felt, but Stephen and Dodo do get a lot to do and reel back and forth than the pair has really gotten in their previous stories together. It's Peter Purvis, Jackie Lane, and Michael Gough's titular Toymaker that make this serial as fun as it is when the substance of the story is as devoid as the sets. For this watch, we watched the 2024 animated reconstruction, and even with all of the expansions and creative liberties given to make the Toymaker's realm even more surreal, it's evident how little this story had in terms of budget. The story and games feel really confused and rushed. a little slapped together, so much so that they are reusing the wardrobe from Marco Polo. At the same time, it's how far they were able to take this budget that really makes me appreciate and enjoy this story for what it is, mixed with the animation, which I think complements the story perfectly for me. I would always rather have that original story as it was originally presented, but I equally appreciate and respect the official animation release we got for the Celestial Toymaker. The Gunfighters from 1966. One of the last purely historical serials for Doctor Who. Do you think it'll change up the formula at all? No, of course not. We land and get separated and spend the next few episodes trying to get back together while meeting the most famous people around. This time country and western flavored when the Doctor and co spend time with both parties involved with the gunfight at the OK Corral. The Doctor specifically getting confused for Doc Holliday by a few parties while Steven and Dodo bounce back and forth between being excited and being in danger. According to brief glances at the internet, this is one of the lesser first Doctor serials in the eyes of the general public. Between the constant singing narration and the offbeat performances from the period actors, I can kind of understand why, but the performances do seem on par with those seen in last stories set in periods like the Aztecs, and I liked that song. This is also a serial that ended up being a pretty good showcase for the Doctor as well as both Steven and Dodo, getting fun moments to shine in their interactions with Doc Holliday and Wyatt Earp. I definitely understand why this story isn't particularly well regarded, but I still really found lots to enjoy here. 1966's The Savages. The planet we've arrived on this week is relatively advanced. Everything seems on the up and up. Don't love that there is a class of untouchables. Okay, and now we are literally draining them of their life force to benefit the rich. This is one of those stories that shows the themes and general mentality that Doctor Who would be known for going forward in the future. Everyone has a moment where they definitely put their foot down and stand firm. The Doctor feels more on character and empathetic than in previous serials. Dodo does that thing where she is strong and firm in one moment, then feigning in the next, while Steven is given a touch more time to shine in his final serial. Steven deciding to get off here on a random planet doesn't feel nearly as powerful as his exit would have been at the end of the massacre of St. Bartholomew's Eve, but there is more than enough weight given to the moment that it feels important, despite only existing in telesnap reconstructed form. This is also a story that works as well as it can in the form we have available. The reconstruction is clear and easy to understand despite there not being a whole lot of dynamic movement for the audience to follow, and moves at a pace that doesn't feel like homework to absorb the story. I just really wish we could properly watch Steven's exit from the series. He has proven to be a really solid and engaging companion. The War Machines from 1966. We are back on contemporary Earth, minding our own business when some super scientists up and built a super AI that learns how to hypnotize people through the phones and make killer robots. What fun for the Doctor and... oh wait, Dodo is brainwashed and MIA for most of the story. Okay. The Doctor and introducing new companions Ben and Polly. These classic serials have the bad habit of giving us the feeling that we are punishing our companions in their final stories, probably because the studio had a really bad habit of punishing their actors, and it shows. Never has the revolving cast of Doctor Who felt so in the forefront as when a companion just falls sick off screen and is virtually forgotten going forward. I also got really confused somehow thinking this was the birth of the great intelligence, but no, we just call the War Machine a supreme intelligence that makes discount Daleks in a series fraught with discount and name brand Daleks. The story itself is certainly not uninteresting or well done, but does get a little drowned out by the very evident on-set drama leaking into the scripts at this point. The Smugglers from 1966. Oh! A historical whose gimmick isn't bouncing between historical figures? What are we going to do without the standard get captured and bounced around plot? Oh, same jam, okay. Well, at least Ben and Polly bring a new dynamic to this riff as everyone gets framed for Moira while hanging around some pirates. And Ben and Polly really do bring a new energy with how quick the pair are on their feet, out talking and tricking people out to do them harm throughout the 4 episodes. Even if much of the runtime is spent in long conversations reminiscent of other historical serials, they are constantly engaging with a 4th part that is crammed full of fight sequences and character deaths. Now, I have seen the reconstructions, but for this rewatch, I found Who Recon's Fanimations on Dailymotion. I cannot thank them enough for the time and effort they've put into making adaptations for missing episodes that even the BBC have deemed too unprofitable to touch. I will always wish we had the original production as it was released, as I've said before, but I would much rather have what Who Recon produced than nothing at all. This is a really great showcase for the different dynamics that new companions can bring to the show more than anything else. It has a similar vibe to other historical episodes without the excitement of name drops every episode, and should also have a not poorly done for early Doctor Who fight. The 10th Planet from 1966. Here we are, the point that would change Doctor Who forever, the renewal of the first Doctor into the second. You'd think maybe we'd landed on the titular 10th planet, but no, just in a snowy military base on Earth, as our long-lost twin planet Mondas is spinning close enough for a full-scale invasion from the Cybermen in their very first appearance. This is a great episode for the Doctor and Ben specifically, between the Doctor having a solid moral high ground to stand on and Ben having a lot to do plot-wise. The pair make for a great combo we only see here. It feels like Polly, though, is more regulated to being the episode secretary, which I don't love. The Cybermen do steal the show, though. There's always been something very off-putting and uncanny valley about the expressionless and foil-ridden Mondasian Cybermen. They are used to great effect here, and it is especially thematic that the cold and emotionless Cybermen make their debut in a barren, snowy wasteland. The only thing I wish for in this serial is a little more setup and pathos for the Doctor's exit. It's not my first watch, but this ending always hits me over the head and out of nowhere like a bat enhanced by the hand of Omega. Doctor Who, The Three Doctors from 1973. Jumping 2 Doctors into the future, and who knows how long into the first Doctor's past. The Time Lords are having some issues while simultaneously camera effects and popcorn ball monsters are hunting the third Doctor on a unit base. The only thing the Time Lords can figure out or manage to do is pluck the second Doctor out of time and space to help, then have the first Doctor video call in every other commercial break to keep everyone else in line. The villain of the 10th anniversary special is the ancient Time Lord Omega, and while I don't love this original design with the giant helmet, the character and Stephen Thorne's delivery are magnificent. I wish it did not take 2 episodes to get to his introduction, but the bickering of the second and third Doctors is more than entertaining enough to keep things moving. I am also really grateful the studio found a way to incorporate William Hartnell around his health complications. His role is small, but his presence is really felt when he's on screen. This episode is a little slow to get going and feels a little more like the 2.5 Doctors, but it's equally fun and witty and is also really important for moving the third Doctor's story forward. The 5 Doctors from 1983, jumping an additional 2 Doctors ahead into the timeline, which means we're now on number 5. And I won't even guess when we are in the first Doctor's timeline, but the first, second, third, and 5th Doctors are plucked out of their collective time streams because the 4th is stuck loading somewhere since Tom Baker refused to return. The Time Lords, in their infinite wisdom, send the Master, the one Time Lord with a hate boner for the Doctor above everyone else, to save the day. Well, the Doctors independently fuck him over so hard that the 5th escapes their little predicament, and the 3rd steals his credentials, which gives 5 a minute to figure things out from the outside, while the other 3 incarnations absolutely terrorize the Master. Of course, we wish William Hartnell could live and act forever, but his recasting with Richard Hartnell works surprisingly well. Hartnell does well to emulate Hartnell, while adding a touch of softness to his take on the Time Lord. His pairing with Susan also would work beautifully if Susan wasn't written to be the same teenager she was when the series first began in her actions. The special as a whole also works really well around the restraints it was met with. Between one Doctor refusing to return at all and another having joined the Nethersphere, the narrative presented makes as much sense as any Doctor Who story. And the character writing, especially that of the Doctors, is superb, some of the best in the entire classic run. Twice Upon a Time from 2017. We didn't see it in the 10th Planet, but apparently the first Doctor was feeling a little like not wanting to go on anymore. He also bumped into a future iteration of himself going through the same fields and hung out with an omnipotent therapy AI. David Bradley is an excellent understudy for William Hartnell. While the script fails the Doctor's character a little at this point, it is really indicative of the first Doctor's run as a whole. Let's just say he was reverting a little in his temperament pre-rejuvenation. This is still obviously the 12th Doctor's story. Of course, he is going to be prevalent and take center stage, But the next time you watch through classic Doctor Who, I would highly recommend putting this on soon after you watch The 10th Planet. It equally works well as a great little postscript for the first Doctor's entire run, entirely separated from 12 and his shenanigans with MVP Bill. 1965's Doctor Who and the Daleks. So which adaptation of the Doctor's first run-in with the Daleks do you prefer? The movie, the serials, the novel, or the comic? I'm sure there's a comic somewhere. Here, because we want to be as legally distinct as possible, Doctor Who is played by Peter Cushing, an absolutely normal human scientist. No, really, he's just normal human dude Peter Cushing, who just figured out time and space distortion and travel with his granddaughters Susan and Barbara. And her boyfriend Ian is also there, I guess. First thing we do with a time machine, end up on a planet Skaro in the midst of an all-or-nothing war between the titular Daleks and Doctor Who cares who else. If you are a little more familiar with the serialized version, as it is more widely available at the time of recording, this has all of the same plot beats, just with a runtime cut down by about 2 episodes worth. Outside of the character changes, I found that every change to the story worked in the narrative's benefit. The script is still a little clunky at times, especially when working in new character elements, but everything moves much quicker in the movie's benefit. It's not necessarily a substitution for the original serial, but it is definitely not a terrible alternative if it came down to it. Daleks' Invasion of Earth 2150 AD from 1966. Totally normal human scientist Doctor Who is back with just his granddaughter Susan this time. Apparently we didn't like Discount Ian and Barbara. This time joined by his niece Louise and Constable Tom, played by fan favorite Bernard Cribbins. The TARDIS crew travel 19 decades into the future to a war-torn London conquered by the Daleks' only alien foe as far as we are aware of in this timeline, the titular Daleks. Again, this is a feature-length adaptation of the Doctor Who serial written by Terry Nation, making just as many changes to the source material as before in its character updates and truncating of the original story. There are changes made to the story because Susan is played by a child. It forces a lot of change that works in the character's benefit as far as I am concerned, especially since she isn't just abandoned in a decrepit post-apocalypse Britain with the dude she met 2 days ago. Plus, Bernard Cribbins is just fantastic. The story still has a few pacing issues. There are a lot of deadpan comedic moments that probably hit with some audiences, but I am not one of them. Even so, I largely enjoy how this story plays out when compared to the original, despite generally preferring the actors and performances in that original version. Dalek Mania from 1995. This is a pretty straightforward documentary that, yes, focuses a lot on the Daleks as you'd imagine, but is equally about the 2 Peter Cushing movies. As a whole, this is more about the movies and their version of the Daleks more so than anything else. There are vintage toys, costumes, and comics that are constantly pushed by both collectors and some of the original film actors, who also share fun stories about the productions. There have been better documentaries made out there, but few surrounding Doctor Who, honestly, and even fewer surrounding the Peter Cushing movies. There are many really cool things on display, and little stories that I'd first heard here, so there is value in this. It's just pretty lifeless, even for a documentary. 2013's An Adventure in Space and Time. Absolutely beautiful love letter to classic Doctor Who, told through a very modern lens, with all the polish the BBC has developed over the half-century since its inception. Following the inception of the series through the eyes of BBC's youngest producer at the time, Variety Lambert, before transitioning to focus a little more on the actor behind the first iteration of the Doctor, William Hartnell. It tells an incredible story both about the struggle to get the series up and running, as well as the connection the character in the series has to the people who put it together and the fans of the series as well. I cannot recommend this enough if you can get your hands on it. cleverdickfilms revised and expanded Doctor Who review of the William Hartnell era. This was probably the most informative and in-depth video I have seen in relation to the first Doctor. Full stop. I will be bringing up this documentary series every time I talk about Doctor Who as well, since he has been going through each individual Doctor's era for years at this point, hyper-analyzing the history and context of each Doctor's time in the spotlight. I don't want to take too much away from his work or spoil the information as it is laid out in his videos. His editing, his diction, and storytelling are worth the watch beyond the plethora of information he provides. But a few of my favorite things I learned while watching his video: I'd never been aware of the study of the science fiction genre as a whole, so his dropping the name of Kingsley Amis's book, The New Maps of Hell, is great. I am already checking that book out and I'm excited for it. I also learned that William Hartnell described the first Doctor as a cross between Father Christmas and the Wizard of Oz, which I think is like the perfect facsimile for the first Doctor. That is the perfect way to describe the character. And this video also argues that it was the juxtaposition between the familiar and the unfamiliar that made the series so popular. The big blue police box on a strange alien world. That feels like pretty similar ideas that I pushed forward in the Doctor Who video that I did and need to plug again somewhere, so here it is. JoshSnares and his Missing Doctor Who episode series. JoshSnares is another Doctor Who focused YouTuber, but his videos largely hyper-focus on the episodes that have been lost. He does an amazing job breaking down the production history of these missing stories while giving a great synopsis of the actual story itself. He also does a lot of videos on the effects of Doctor Who as well as a lot of Doctor Who animation, but for me he was specifically invaluable when I was watching episodes like the Daleks' Master Plan and Marco Polo. If the gaps of Doctor Who's history are interesting to you in any way, shape, or form, please check out JoshSnares' channel. Wow, okay, thank you so much for sitting with me and listening to my ramblings about the earliest days of one of my favorite series. If anyone was wondering about personal recommendations to just jump into a random serial, the second adventure with the Daleks is a great story in a vacuum, and Planet of the Giants still did so much that I personally had fun with and enjoyed that those would probably be my two biggest pushes your way, but I'm equally curious which stories other fans might push for the first Doctor. I don't have much more to get into, really. Next month we are focusing a little more on Godzilla's Showa era, so I hope you join me there for those discussions. Otherwise, keep on keeping on and trying to make the days a little bit brighter. Thank you.